Now, when it comes to onboarding, the expectations on leaders are significant. We need to cover technical, managerial, as well as cultural training and education, often without the luxury of relinquishing the other aspects of our day jobs. In our next talk, James Stanier, SVP at Brandwatch, will present Engineering Onboarding, a whirlwind tour, giving us practical tips on how to make an employee's introduction to an organization not only positive, but lasting.
Hey, thank you very much for the introduction. It's really nice to be here today, and I hope that you're enjoying the conference so far. So, this is going to be a whirlwind tour because we don't have a huge amount of time together. My name is James, and I'm Senior Vice President of Engineering at Brandwatch. I've been there for over 9 years now, so I've onboarded my fair share of people as we've gone from a small handful of renegades to a sort of 500-person company. So, without further ado, let's get started. So what we're going to be covering today, first off, what is onboarding and why should I care? After all, the pandemic has hit our industry very hard and we might not be hiring anyone right now. So why should we care about onboarding? Hopefully I will convince you. Talking of that, I'm going to insert some things that we've learned during the pandemic, which could be very helpful for your onboarding experience in general. And then we're going to tackle the main event itself. We're going to talk about onboarding by splitting it up into 3 themes. Those are technical, managerial, and cultural. And within each of those, there'll be a key North Star that you can orient towards to make your onboarding experience great. And then at the end, we're going to recap what we've looked at and think of some takeaways as well. So what is it is where we will start. What is onboarding? What I did here, which is the usual thing, is that if you give a talk on X, you go away and find the dictionary definition of X. So after some Googling, onboarding is the action or process of integrating a new employee into an organization. That's the bit that we really care about today. It can also mean onboarding a client or a customer, but that's not what this talk is about. Fundamentally, it's about somebody joining your organization and then feeling healthy, happy, productive, and secure in their job and becoming a net positive contributor. So why should I care? Well, we might not be hiring right now. We might be hiring less than we used to be. But people joining companies will always happen. And we as employees should really care about the output of our teams and about the happiness of our staff. And no matter how much of a genius you are, everyone who joins a company progresses along this, which is what I like to call the contribution curve. On the left-hand side of the screen, on the y-axis, you have the amount of contribution that someone is giving, and along the x-axis, you have time. And even if you employed the cleverest person in the world, when they first join a company, they don't know the people. They may not know the product very well. They've certainly never seen the code before. So it relies on the effort of other people around them in order for them to be productive. So in terms of onboarding, what we should be thinking about is this chart. How do we get people to become net positive contributors as quickly as possible and accept that at the start people will be net negative and not just let them dwindle on their own, but actually support them through this progression along the curve. And why you should care is that fundamentally you are accountable for how long this takes for new members of staff in your organization. It doesn't mean you have to be their manager, you can be their colleague, you could be their mentor, you could just simply sit next to them, virtually or not virtually. You are accountable for how long this takes when you employ somebody. So I've tried to look clever, and I've defined onboarding as this function. Function O for onboarding, which takes 3 inputs. It's T, M, and C, which, if you haven't already guessed, means technical, managerial, and cultural. And your onboarding speed is effectively a function of your organizational efficiency in your technical, managerial, and cultural areas. So if all of those things are great, your onboarding speed will be great. And the interesting thing here is that this doesn't say that your onboarding program is the thing that makes your onboarding good. What I'm saying is that's a layer on top of it. Really, your onboarding speed is to do with how good you are as a department. Because making your onboarding experience great makes your department great. So it's a lens that you should be using all of the time when you think about how you do things. What would it mean for a new person to come along in order to make your department great and efficient? So we'll consider a North Star for each area, and the North Stars are on slides with a little star in the corner so you can see what they are. But first, something that we've learned from this year. This year has been an interesting year. I don't need to talk about 2020. We all know about it. Lots of things have happened. what we noticed as a company is that we transitioned from being a geographically central company around a few HQ offices to one that is fully remote. And that's actually a change that we've made permanently now. But what it really highlighted, before I talk about onboarding specifically, is that we relied way too much on people being near each other in order to disseminate information. Teams were no longer able to sit next to each other. Things were lacking in our documentation. We were not recording meetings so that people could view them later. We had a terrible attitude towards time zones and making sure that people were in sync. So if there's one thing that we could take from this year that we could learn amongst these terrible times, is that for our onboarding and for the way that we talk and document, if we treat everybody as remote, even if they aren't remote, then the knock-on effects of having to communicate in different ways create more artifacts and create an onboarding experience that's way better for everybody. So there's just a little thing to leave up front. Treat everybody as remote, even if they aren't remote. Your onboarding will get better and better as a result. So back to this equation. Let's focus on the first bit of onboarding. We've got technical, managerial, and cultural. We'll start with technical. What do I mean by technical? Well, I mean the core function of someone's job. If you're joining as a software engineer, it's writing and deploying code. And the North Star that we have for technical onboarding is, how do I push to production on my first day? Now, not everyone joins as a software engineer, so really it means one full cycle of whatever the critical path of your job is. So it could be QAing a feature, it could be answering and resolving a customer support request, it could be completing an IT ticket. But how do I do that on my first day is a North Star that, if you use it as a lens to inspect how you do things, can greatly improve how you work as a department. So let's, for example, think of a software engineer joining. Day one, or day zero if we index like computer scientists. What do I need to do to push to production? Well, maybe a number of things. Firstly, I need to have some documentation available to understand, what is my job, what do I do, how do I get access to the things that I need, what's an overview of the system that I'm contributing towards. And then I need to work out how to get access to the code base. Maybe I need to be assigned a bug, I need to check it out locally, I need to build, I need to deploy, I need to insert some code in the right place and hopefully fix a problem. And then when I've tested it locally, I then need to think about deployment. How do I open a pull request? How do I get it reviewed? How do I get it QA'd? How do I merge into the next environment, whether that's staging or production behind a flag? And then when it's eventually gone live, hopefully through an easy way, such as clicking a button, how do I then discover that the changes that I've made are successful, either by looking at logging or by aggregate metrics? So for onboarding, that's a lot of work. That is a huge amount of stuff in order to have all together in order to ensure a good onboarding experience. However, what I hope it shows you is that if you use how do you push to production on your first day as a lens, then you can drive incremental improvement in all of these areas. So how do I push to production on my first day may be an extremely long journey for technical onboarding, but you get there step by step. And it's a very, very valuable one, because the sooner that people can push to production or perform a critical task in their job, the sooner that they push themselves up this contribution curve towards net positive contribution. So that's the first bit covered off. That's technical. We'll move on to managerial next. Now, what I mean by managerial onboarding isn't onboarding a manager. What I'm talking about is the managerial structure in which a new employee inserts themselves. It's the relationship with their manager and the planning and the work that they do together. So the North Star here is fundamentally for a new employee knowing, what am I going to achieve in the next 90 days? And that lens allows you to focus on the relationship with the manager and the processes around that let you define and achieve these things. So I'll send a bunch of resources around after this, because I've written about some of these things. Some tools and techniques that are super useful here are, firstly, there's an exercise called contracting, which is the first one-to-one which you have with your manager, where both of you prepare a bunch of questions about how it is to work together. These can be, what are some of the benefits of working together, some of the difficulties that you might face. It might be how you like to receive feedback. There's a whole list of questions that can really help build that solid rapport and foundation at the start of your relationship. Having career tracks available in your department also greatly helps, because a new employee can join, understand their role, how it's defined, what their job title is, and also how they can potentially progress in the department, which can then orient them to their plan of what they want to do in the future. Having a culture of weekly one-to-ones, private time between a newly onboarded employee and their manager, allows the safe space to talk about career progression, what they're working on, and how to keep going. And then that formulates a clear plan And I always suggest 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days, defining what they want to achieve, and then having clear checklists to work through helps somebody feel like they're really being productive. So that North Star of what am I going to achieve in the next 90 days as a newly onboarded employee, with active management and planning, creates stability and psychological safety for somebody who's new to the company. So we've covered off technical, we've covered off managerial. Let's think about cultural onboarding. What does cultural onboarding really mean? Well, the North Star that I think is important here is how do I become an integral part of the wider company? That's quite a big ask, actually, and I've broken this into separate areas here. So the first thing that I think is really important, and you may or may not have control over this, is knowing what your values are as a company and knowing what your mission is. Values are incredibly important because they define how you interact with other employees, and they also define how you act towards your customers as well, and the kind of work that you do. A mission is also super critical because even if you're fixing a bug or diagnosing something that's extremely frustrating, you know that all of this is in service of some mission that excites you for the future. Now, not everybody watching this talk will be in a position to define the values and mission for their whole company, and I appreciate that. I'm not in that position either. But the really nice thing about values and the nice thing about missions is that you can fundamentally do two things. Either you can take the ones that are defined at your company level and you can cascade them down to the area that you own, or even if there aren't any, you can create your own for your team or your division or so on. For example, you could run a workshop where each of your team talks about the values of what matters to them and how they wish to interact with each other, and also the mission for your team in the future. Defining it helps people who are onboarding because they understand how to act and what they're contributing towards. Now, that's the more lofty values and mission-based part of onboarding, but also having less serious, fun things help people build their network and feel connected to their friends and peers. And these, for example, can be very, very low effort, but super high impact things. Having a buddy system is something that can only need a spreadsheet and an email to start off. Having people who wish to be mentors submit their names into the spreadsheet, and then people who wish to be mentees submit their name into the spreadsheet, and then a little bit of matchmaking can create some wonderful mentor or mentorship relationships in your department. Having a culture of having virtual coffees with people who are not necessarily on your team can help people build their network without even having to try. So having some kind of coffee roulette program that you could do as an app, or just potentially having your manager introduce the newly onboarded employee to somebody influential in sales or customer success or marketing, can help someone feel that they really are connected to all the other parts of the company that they serve as an engineer. If we were pre-pandemic, then a lot of the interests and hobbies connections would probably be happening outside of work, but we've created, for example, an index of all of our Slack channels, which have our gaming and music and sports interested people so that they can communicate and build relationships with others. And most importantly, telling newly onboarded employees that it's absolutely fine to slack off, to have fun, as well as doing their main job, is integral to their success as an employee because it helps build connections with other people. So the North Star for onboarding in a cultural aspect is how do I become an integral part of the wider company and feel amongst friends and colleagues with a purpose. Now, just to sort of recap where we've been so far, we've looked at onboarding as a function, and sometimes people address onboarding by writing an onboarding program. I've certainly been there, and that onboarding program gets out of date extremely quickly. So by thinking of it slightly differently in this way, in that your onboarding speed is a function of your organizational efficiency in your technical, managerial, and cultural areas, you provide a lens in which to inspect the way that you get things done, the support that you give to people, and their easiness and ability to build their network, which then only needs a very thin overlay of an onboarding program on top in order to make them feel productive. And the North Stars in these areas, just to recap, are how do I push to production on my first day? Because what is the process and procedure that needs to be in place for me to get there? What am I going to achieve in the next 90 days? And how am I going to become an integral part of the wider company? But the really interesting thing about this is that even if you don't hire anybody next month, next year, or even in the next 5 years, if you keep onboarding in your mind and you keep that function in your mind and you use it as a lens to inspect the way in which you do things again and again, the head fake is that everything that you do here will benefit all of your existing staff, regardless of whether you hire anybody. And that is fundamentally because we go through the contribution curve again and again and again, to different degrees. For example, an existing team may have somebody leave and somebody join, and they have to bond again. A team may change the project that they're working on because it might have a different domain. There might be different expertise and technologies to use. We all slip up and down the curve to net negative, to net positive, because our work is fundamentally changing all of the time. So really, onboarding itself is not to do with just onboarding. It's to do with the function of your entire department, and having that constant iteration on your technical, your managerial, and your cultural areas will make your department better for everybody, whether they're new or whether they're not. So what you have to think is, how can I make small improvements to the way that you work every single day? If you find that there are snags in your deployment process, how can you set some time aside to fix them? If it's not clear to somebody what their goals are, how can you put a process in place that people can think about 90-day goals, that they can have goal setting exercises at regular points through the year through performance reviews, and how these can be brought up in one-to-ones with their managers? How can you provide the training to people to support others that can then be used to onboard new employees? So that's it. I hope this has been a different experience about onboarding, a different way of framing the situation, because I've written so many onboarding programs in the past and I've seen them go out of date so quickly that instead of just wasting time writing onboarding programs again and again, recording another 20 video series, introducing everybody to the departments that then change next week, why not just focus on the workings of your department itself and then write a thin veneer over the top, which just points to the way you already do things in order to make people feel quick, productive, net positive contributors. So thank you very much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. If you'd like to connect with me, I'll be on Slack afterwards, and I'll be writing up a whole bunch of the resources that I've pointed to in this talk, talking about contracting, talking about how to do one-to-ones. And if you're interested in that kind of thing and more, I have a book. You can find it on my website, theengineeringmanager.com/book, and you can get 40% off right now because of Thanksgiving and Black Friday sales. It's called Become an Effective Software Engineering Manager. Thank you so much for your time. I've really appreciated you being here, and I hope that you'll use the lens of onboarding in order to continually iteratively improve your department. Thank you very much.